French President Emmanuel Macron said his country will not give in to terrorism after 3 people were killed in a knife attack by a Tunisian national in Nice last Thursday. The 3rd attack in less than 2 months. It followed the recent murder of teacher Samuel Paty, who was beheaded for showing controversial cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad during a lesson about freedom of speech. The violence has highlighted the long-simmering tensions in France over Islam and sparked debate about what has been done to protect and unite citizens. What do these attacks reveal about France's underlying cultural and political factors? What measure is President Macron, a fierce defender of French secularism and the right to freedom of speech, taking to unite his country? Are French Muslims poorly treated, and are reactions in the Muslim world helping or hindering? Joining us for the discussion are Professor JOAV TOKER from American Graduate School in Paris and Professor Douglas Yates from Cergy-Pontoise University. Professor TOKER, to you first. Macron said on Saturday that he understands the feelings of Muslims who are shocked by cartoons of Prophet Muhammad, but that quote-unquote radical Islam poses a threat to everyone, especially Muslims. Earlier this month, he was criticized for defending secular values, that Islam is a religion that is in crisis in the world. That is what he said. What do you make of President Macron's position?
Well, President Macron, in a way, I guess you refer to a long interview which he accorded to the Muslim television channel in the Arab world, Al Jazeera, in which for about an hour President Macron exposed his rationale in terms of historical context and political motivation and philosophical concepts regarding this famous concept of laïcité, with the French word for secularism, but which is, in the case of France, a very particular notion, resemble what many Anglo-Saxon and other countries understand by the concept of secularism. So you were right in your introduction in the sense that what has been happening over the last few days, but actually few years or more than few years in France and in other places in Europe, actually focuses on Islam, radical, violent Islam on one hand, and major Western powers, mainly France, which I remind us all has the largest Muslim population in Europe. So there is no debate in France regarding what should be the position regarding murderous initiatives. This is not controversial. Although there is debate, and there will probably going to be a debate for some time, on around the notion of secularism and what does it really mean, and what are the fallouts of these laïcité policies when it comes to international affairs, when it comes to relations between France and other countries in the Arab Muslim world, and also, and perhaps mainly, regarding the 4 to 6 million Muslim residents and citizens who are part of the French national community.
Yeah, Professor Yates, I mean, this is a delicate balance, isn't it? How can Macron, in your opinion, defend freedom of speech and secularism in France without offending France's Muslims?
Well, I think, first of all, he'll have to make a series of symbolic gestures to the Muslim community, and that would be the case no matter what. But as we can see, just like COVID, the war on terror is not under control in France, despite government efforts. So the goal of the terrorists, the Al-Qaeda terrorists, because they're associated with Al-Qaeda, is to have the government and have the French people overreact and take it out on all Muslims. This is why Macron needs to send out symbolic gestures to the Muslim community that they are part of France. And the reason the terrorists want the government, want them to take it out on all Muslims, is to radicalize those Muslims, to divide them. So the most important thing that Macron could do is not emphasize the freedom of speech, but rather emphasize the nation as digesting and comprising Muslims as a part
Yeah, I guess messaging is very important at this moment. Professor TOKER, why do you think France, suffer so much from, Islamist attacks, more so than perhaps many other European countries? What specific cultural, political, and perhaps economic factors do you think fuel these tragedies?
There's a very long list of contexts and issues and historical events which gather right in order to understand that, starting from the factual fact, which I already mentioned, which is the fact that the Muslim community in France is the largest one quantitatively in Europe. We're speaking about France, which is, as we all know, the ex-colonial power in many African and Asian countries, amongst those Muslim and Arab countries. France is active in the Sahel, in Africa, in a context which is also highly related to radical Islam groups and the warfare against France, in particular against African countries and against the West in general. France has been involved and still is involved in the theater in Syria, in the coalition efforts to crush Daesh, and in the aftermath of that. If you wish, I can add, the fact that France is involved right now, for example, in military operations and insinuations in the Eastern Mediterranean, in a context which is a very tense one, regarding Turkey, another Muslim country. And as you may know, there have been some rough language exchange between the president of Turkey, Erdogan, and Mr. Macron, French president. So I can add the Libyan situation to that. Once again, a Muslim Arab country in which there is French presidents and French ambitions, and the conflict is still on. So you see, there are many elements over the international scene which gather, and they join tragically the tensions on French soil itself.
Professor Yates, what role do you think the colonial history played? When you think about the fact that France is the largest recipient of Muslim migrants from its former colonies, such as Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco.
Yeah, this is part of France's Mediterranean culture, because France kind of has one foot in Southern Europe and one foot in Northern Europe. And if you look at the city where the most recent attack occurred, Nice, this is not the first attack in this city. There was a terrible 19-ton truck that killed 8 people and wounded 500 on Bastille Day. This is a city that's affluent. It's a city where French women will wear bikinis. Some will go topless. There's a great deal of affluence. And there you have a Muslim community, and it's become a breeding ground for terrorists. You have the largest population of Chechens living in Nice. And of course, you have many of the Pieds Noirs and the descendants of those French Algerians, 1 million of whom fled Algeria after the War of Independence. The man who committed this act was a Tunisian. He arrived in Nice that morning, and he would have blended easily into the population of disgruntled Muslims. Not only does France have the largest Muslim population in Europe, but it has a foreign policy which keeps it closely integrated with its former colonies in North Africa, like Tunisia, like Algeria, and Lebanon.
Professor TOKER, some observers have suggested that the problems many French Muslims face in terms of inclusion and economic opportunities is fueling these attacks. What do you think? Do you think these attackers are true Muslims?
No, the attackers belong to a sect-type, radical, small but still at times efficient group, which is committing horrible acts and horrible deeds with which the very large majority of French Muslims are, of course, disagree profoundly. Now, it is true that the Muslim population in France and other demographically speaking minority groups do suffer from different dimensions of discrimination when it comes to the market, the labor market, when it comes to housing, when it comes to job opportunities, when it comes to career opportunities, etc. So there are socio-economic, more conventional, quote-unquote, problems which actually add some weight, if you wish, and add some complications to the situation in which the Muslims in France find themselves caught in this extremely uncomfortable situation in which, on one hand, they may be believing very innocently and very normally in the basic principles of the religion and the faith, and on the other hand, there is the danger of assimilating them, those the great majority of Muslims in France who just exercise Islam in an innocent way, with those radical, murderous small groups, which for some part come and being fed from outside, and for some part, unfortunately, are now active and intend to remain active over French soil itself.
Professor Yates, do you think this is really about Muslims versus non-Muslims? Or, you know, are these attackers just trying to justify their brutality on religious grounds?
A tricky question. If we look at the individual alone who committed this act, French. This was a man who was a refugee from Tunisia, arrived in Italy, in Lampedusa, and literally set foot on French soil in September. So the war that he was engaged in was clearly a religious ideological war. He arrived in Nice at 6 in the morning, 6:40, and less than 2 hours later, he went to the nearest Catholic basilica. And he randomly killed, including decapitated, people just because they were in that church. And there's been 4 attacks against Catholic churches in the last 5 years. That part, yes, that's ideological and religious. But the deeper problem, and the reason that this message is so well, not just in France, but internationally, where now there's a boycott against French products, is that the French Islamic community and its relations abroad with the Islamic communities abroad is complicated. France likes to present itself as a country that has a special ability to speak with the Muslim world. But on the other hand, it's conflicted because it does have fundamental principles of liberty of thought, freedom of speech, and freedom to even be atheist. And within that come the cartoons, the core of this.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Professor, but I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today's discussion. Many thanks to Professor JOAV TOKER and Professor Douglas Yates. And that will do it for this edition of The Point. Thank you for watching. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing.